The door slammed so hard it rattled the windows, leaving a hollow echo across the sun-baked Crane Ranch. "Pack your things, Martha. Ain't no place for you here," Samuel Crane said, his voice sharp as the wind whipping across the plains. Martha, his young stepmother of 35, stood frozen on the porch, her hands trembling over the folds of her faded dress. The late spring sun caught her auburn hair in fiery streaks, and her green eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. For years she had managed the house, tended the livestock, and softened Samuel's harsh edges, but now she was deemed a burden, cast out by the very man who owed her a life of respect. The ranch hands shifted uneasily in the yard, their boots crunching over dry dirt and scattered hay. None dared speak. Samuel, a man whose wealth and cattle empire stretched across the valley, was known for his iron will. Yet behind his hard eyes, guilt clawed at him like the prairie dogs tunneling through the arid soil. "Please, Samuel." Martha's voice, cracked, carried on the dry wind like a whisper of pleading. "I only ask for a corner of the home I helped build. A place to rest." Samuel's jaw tightened. Pride and fear had barricaded his heart. "You'll find shelter in town. Reverend will see to it." She lowered her gaze, swallowing her hurt, and slowly made her way down the dust-choked road that led into town. The ranch that had once been warm and filled with laughter now stood cold, its wide porches empty, its fences casting long shadows over the stirring prairie. 3 days later, whispers traveled faster than the wind. A lone warrior had been seen riding through the valley, a figure cut from legend, broad-shouldered and bare-chested, his skin bronzed by sun and wind. Turquoise and silver jewelry caught the light as his long black hair trailed behind him, flowing like a banner. He carried no gun, only a bow and a quiver of arrows. The town said he had found Martha exhausted and stranded along the dusty road, her energy nearly gone. Without hesitation, the warrior had lifted her onto his horse with astonishing strength and steadiness, guiding her safely toward the Crane Ranch. As if the plains themselves obeyed his will. By the next morning, Samuel saw the warrior in the valley, standing tall and silent, a nod of respect exchanged that seemed to pierce through his pride. Samuel felt a shiver run down his spine, an acknowledgment of honor and judgment both, and a reminder that actions, even when cruel, do not go unseen in this wide, unyielding land. And Samuel Crane, wealthy and powerful though he was, would soon learn that pride has its cost and that honor can arrive unbidden, even on the wings of a pigzimwoma. 3 days had passed since Martha had been sent away, and the sun now hung high over the valley, casting sharp shadows across the Crane Ranch. Samuel Crane had tried to bury his guilt beneath ledgers and livestock, pacing the corral with restless steps. Yet every time the wind rattled the windows or stirred the prairie grass, he felt her absence like a physical ache. The house, once humming with quiet laughter and murmured conversations, now echoed with emptiness. It was then that the horizon shifted. A lone figure appeared atop a chestnut stallion, riding with an effortless grace that made the dust rise in rolling waves behind him. His chest was bare, bronzed and taut from years under the sun, and his long black hair flowed like ink along his back. Adornments of turquoise and silver glimmered against his skin. Across his shoulder rested a bow, a quiver of arrows at his side, and his eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, scanned the valley with the quiet authority of a man who belonged to the land itself. Samuel froze, the weight of the moment pressing down like a sand-laden wind. He had heard whispers of warriors who roamed the plains, men who were as much myth as man, but seeing one in person made the heart of the prairie tremble. The warrior approached the porch with deliberate calm, hooves clattering softly on the wooden boards of the corral gate. Samuel's hands clenched at his sides, unsure whether to greet him or flee. "Samuel Crane?" The warrior's voice was low but carried across the yard like rolling thunder. There was no accusation, no plea, only an undeniable authority that demanded attention. "Yes," Samuel stammered, unsure how to answer. He was a man used to commanding men, negotiating deals, and bending the town to his will, but he felt powerless now, stripped bare by the weight of the unseen judgment in those dark eyes. The warrior nodded once, then reached to a leather satchel strapped across his horse. From it, he drew a folded bundle of cloth, carefully revealing Martha's shawl, worn and weathered from travel. Her scent lavender and the faint trace of the field she had tended wafted faintly as Samuel recognized it. "She is well," the warrior said simply. "She rests, and no harm has come to her." Samuel's throat tightened. Relief, shame, and pride collided inside him, forming a bitter taste he could not swallow. You returned her?" he asked, voice cracking with unspoken emotion. The warrior only nodded again, then dismounted with fluid precision. His boots hit the ground silently, and he stood taller than any man Samuel had ever met. "You expelled her," he said, matter of fact. "Not as accusation, but as observation. And yet your land and your heart are worth honoring. That is why I come." Samuel blinked. Honor? After what he had done? He opened his mouth but found no words sufficient for the guilt gnawing at him. The warrior's gaze softened ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the struggle within. Without another word, the warrior raised a hand in a gesture of recognition. Samuel felt the weight of it, a silent acknowledgment that he had been seen flaws, pride, and all. The gesture was simple, yet carried the resonance of a lifetime's respect. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the wind whipping through the corral, dust swirling around their boots. Samuel's ranch hands looked on in awe, whispers of wonder and fear passing between them. They had heard tales of warriors honoring men for deeds they barely understood, but to witness it firsthand was to feel the pulse of the land itself vibrating. Through every grain of dirt, every sway of the prairie grass. Finally, the warrior mounted again, giving Samuel a last nod before turning toward the horizon. Dust rose in a golden cloud behind him, and for a brief, shimmering instant, it seemed as if the sun itself rode with him. Samuel felt a strange weight lift from his chest, yet it was replaced by something heavier, a dawning understanding that wealth and power were meaningless without respect, and that honor was something neither bought nor sold. As the warrior disappeared into the rolling plains, Samuel sank to the porch steps, staring at the horizon where Martha had been saved. The prairie wind carried her faint laughter, her voice etched into the memory of the land. And in that moment, Samuel realized that true courage and true honor was not about ruling over men, but about protecting those who could not protect themselves. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of humility, and with it, the seed of redemption. The morning after the warrior's visit, Samuel Crane could not shake the vision of him, the shirtless, muscular figure of legend, long black hair whipping in the wind, turquoise and silver jewelry glinting in the sun. The memory burned hotter than any fire in his fireplace, reminding him that actions, whether cruel or kind, left a mark far deeper than he had realized. He walked through the sprawling ranch, boots crunching over dry dirt and scattered hay, the wind tugging at the collars of his coat. Each corral, each fenced pasture seemed emptier without Martha there, and the ache in his chest grew heavier with every step. He had always measured his worth in cattle, land, and silver, yet now he found himself questioning the very foundation of his life. In the town that sprawled across the next ridge, rumors of the warrior's deeds had already reached the ears of every farmer, merchant, and ranch hand. Some spoke in awe, others in fear, but all agreed the warrior did not honor lightly. Samuel could feel the weight of judgment pressing down, a heavy reminder that the land remembered every slight, every act of cruelty. By midday, the prairie sun had climbed high, painting the sky a pale, merciless blue. Samuel wandered toward the corral where his prize stallions grazed, their coats shining in the sunlight. The largest, a black stallion named Midnight, whinnied softly, sensing the unrest in its master. Samuel knelt beside the animal, running a hand over its neck, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He remembered Martha's laughter, the way it had filled the kitchen on cold mornings, how her hands had smoothed the wrinkles of his father's old shirts, how her quiet voice had tempered his own stubbornness. He had dismissed her, calling her a burden, yet now he realized the truth. She had been the heartbeat of the ranch, the soul that held him steady through storms and drought alike. A sound carried across the wind, a soft thud of hooves against hard-packed dirt. Samuel's heart jumped. Rising, he saw the warrior again, this time with another figure at his side, equally imposing, equally bare-chested, muscles glinting in the sun, hair dark and long, jewelry reflecting light in intricate patterns. Together, they rode like shadows across the prairie, calm but commanding. Samuel felt a wave of fear and awe. They approached the ranch slowly, deliberately, their eyes fixed on him. This was not a visit of anger, it was something far weightier, something he could not yet name. The first warrior dismounted with ease, standing tall as ever, and motioned for Samuel to come closer. "You have wealth, power, and land," the warrior said, voice low but resonant, carrying across the corral like rolling thunder. "Yet true strength is measured in the care you give, the honor you uphold, and the humility you carry. You have failed in one of these, yet the opportunity to redeem yourself remains." Samuel's jaw tightened. Words caught in his throat. The second warrior, his companion, held a hand toward the barn. Inside, draped over a clean blanket, lay Martha, safe and resting, her eyes closed, her face peaceful. They had returned her quietly, without fanfare, without expectation, simply because it was right. Samuel swallowed hard, his pride warring with his gratitude. I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice rough with emotion. The first warrior shook his head gently. "Say nothing. Let your actions now speak for you. Guard her, honor her, and learn that the measure of a man is not his wealth, but the care he shows for those who cannot defend themselves." Samuel felt the weight of the lesson pressing into his chest, heavy as a boulder, yet somehow cleansing. Dust swirled around the warriors' boots as they mounted again, preparing to leave. Samuel wanted to speak, to beg them to stay, but he knew their presence was a gift, not a favor to be held. As the two warriors rode off into the glowing horizon, Samuel sank to the ground, staring at the barn where Martha slept. His hand shook, not from fear, but from the dawning understanding of what he had lost and what he could yet regain. For the first time in decades, Samuel Crane realized that true honor and courage were not won in business deals or in cattle drives, but in the small, quiet acts of care and protection. And for the first time, he vowed he would not squander the second chance he had been given. The wind carried the faint scent of prairie sage and her perfume, mingling with the dust of the corral, and Samuel knew the land itself had witnessed his failure and offered him the opportunity for redemption. The sun was sinking low behind the distant hills, casting long amber shadows across the Crane ranch. Samuel Crane sat on the edge of the porch, boots dusty, coat undone, staring at the fading light. He could still feel the presence of the warriors there, commanding strength, their quiet authority, and the unwavering respect they carried for life itself. For the first time, he realized that power was meaningless without honor, that wealth alone could not buy peace. The ranch seemed smaller somehow, yet heavier. The fences, The barns, even the fields themselves, felt like witnesses, holding memory of his actions as if the land itself could speak. He thought of Martha, resting safely in the barn, her breathing calm, her hands folded over the shawl the tia hatha Martha, resting safely in the barn, her breathing calm, her hands folded over the shawl the tia. Warrior had returned to her. He had expelled her with cold words, yet she had returned to his care without complaint. Guided by the quiet might of the warrior, Samuel's hands clenched on his knees. Pride had been his companion for decades, driving him to expand his ranch, to dominate his rivals, to amass wealth and influence. But pride had also been his curse, blinding him to the very people who made his life meaningful. His stepmother, his young, vibrant stepmother of 35, was not a burden, as he had told himself, but a lifeline he had severed with thoughtless cruelty. The wind carried a whisper of sage, and with it the faint echo of the warriors' voices. Samuel closed his eyes, imagining them riding across the horizon, the sun glinting off their tribal jewelry, their muscles taut beneath bronzed skin. They had honored him not for his power, not for his wealth, but for his potential to learn, to grow, and to restore the respect he had denied. By dusk, Samuel had made a decision. He walked to the barn where Martha slept, brushing the dust from his coat. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and lingering warmth, the familiar scent of a home he had nearly destroyed. He entered softly, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, the faintest smile brushing her lips. "Martha." "I was wrong," he said, voice trembling. She reached for his hand, strong despite the days she had traveled alone. "I know," she whispered. "You're only human. But it's not too late to make it right." The weight of her forgiveness settled on him, heavier than any ledger, any deed, any cattle drive. Samuel felt tears prick at his eyes. For the first time, he understood that humility was not weakness, but strength, the kind of strength the warriors had recognized in him, even when he could not see it himself. Outside, the prairie wind began to stir again, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of grass, and the distant echo of a hawk calling across the valley. Samuel rose, taking Martha's hand and guiding her outside. Together, they watched the sun sink beneath the horizon, the sky painted in molten golds and deep purples, a reminder that even after the harshest day, beauty could still return. He turned to the fields, to the fences, to the land that had witnessed his failures. "I will honor this land," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "And I will honor you, Martha. From now on I will measure my worth not in wealth, but in how I protect and cherish what matters most." As the stars began to pierce the twilight, Samuel felt a flicker of hope. The warrior's lesson had taken root, and understanding that true courage is not shown in domination or pride, but in care, in protection, and in the quiet acts of respect that leave the soul intact. And for the first time in years, Samuel Crane felt a stirring of redemption, a fragile, luminous promise that he could still reclaim the honor he had almost lost. The ranch was no longer just a testament to wealth. It was a living, breathing place of responsibility, one that demanded courage of the heart. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and in its sigh, Samuel imagined the warrior's shadow, stretching across the valley, a silent reminder that honor is always watching, and that the path to redemption is one a man must choose with courage and humility. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and sun-baked earth across the Crane Ranch. Samuel Crane moved quietly among the corral, inspecting the fences, the cattle, and the barns. Each step was deliberate, heavy with thought. Since the warriors had appeared, his pride had softened, replaced by a strange awareness, a recognition that life's value was measured not in wealth or power, But in honor, respect, and protection, Martha emerged from the barn, shawl draped loosely across her shoulders. Her auburn hair glinted in the early sunlight, and her green eyes carried warmth even as they reminded him of the pain he had caused. She moved with purpose, tending the horses, brushing the dust from their coats with careful hands. Samuel watched her, silently ashamed of how quickly he had dismissed her, and yet quietly grateful that she remained a part of his life. The prairie was alive with movement, hawks calling from the hills, cattle lowing in the pastures, and wind sweeping across the dry grass in rolling waves. Samuel felt the land itself watching him, the same way the warriors had, as if the plains demanded accountability. He knelt to mend a broken fence post, sweat glinting on his brow, and realized how long it had been since he had worked with intention. Rather than habit. Suddenly, a sound stirred the stillness, the rhythmic thud of hooves against hard-packed dirt. Samuel looked up, and his breath caught. The warrior had returned. This time he was not alone. Beside him rode another figure, equally formidable, shirtless, muscular, long black hair flowing in the wind, adorned with turquoise, bone, and silver. Tribal jewelry. They rode as though the land itself bent to their will, silent but commanding. Presence felt more than heard. Samuel rose to his feet, heart pounding. The warriors dismounted, their boots kicking up dust as they approached. The first warrior, eyes steady and piercing, nodded once in recognition. The second, equally imposing, gestured toward the fields. The land remembers. Samuel Crane, the first warrior said, voice low and deliberate. It sees those who honor it and those who fail. You have begun to learn, but knowledge alone is not enough. Action must follow. Samuel swallowed hard, nodding. I understand, he said, voice rough but sincere. I want to make it right. I want to honor the land and those who depend on it. The first warrior studied him as if weighing the truth of his words. Then he nodded, a subtle gesture of approval. Actions speak louder than words. Protect, care, and serve. Let your deeds honor those you have wronged. Samuel turned to Martha, who had followed him into the yard, and saw her watching quietly, understanding but cautious. He realized that redemption was not simply a matter of grand gestures, but of daily choices, how he treated those around him, how he cared for the land, and how he honored the people who trusted him. The warriors mounted again, moving toward the horizon, their presence both a challenge and a promise. Samuel felt their gaze lingering on him, a reminder that true honor is always watched, always tested. He took a deep breath, the prairie wind tugging at his coat and sleeves, and he made a silent vow. He would live differently for the next hours. He worked alongside Martha, mending fences, feeding cattle, and repairing the barn. Each task carried weight beyond its utility. Each moment was a chance to practice the lessons the warriors had imparted: patience, care, humility, and respect. The sun climbed higher, turning the dust into a golden haze that clung to their skin and clothes. As if the land itself was marking their labor. By midday, Samuel paused to look across the valley. The ranch no longer seemed empty or oppressive. It was alive, a living entity that demanded stewardship, courage, and integrity. And he understood, finally, that wealth without honor was hollow, and power without conscience was meaningless. As he stood there, Martha beside him, Samuel felt the first real stirrings of transformation. The warrior's lesson had taken root, growing quietly in the dust and sun, in the rhythm of labor and care. The plains stretched endlessly beyond them, a challenge and a promise. And Samuel Crane knew he would never again face it with pride alone. He would face it with honor. The sun hung low over the prairie, painting the valley in molten gold and deep shadows. Samuel Crane walked the perimeter of his ranch, boots crunching against dry soil, eyes scanning the fields as though the land itself could judge him. For weeks he had labored with Martha at his side, repairing fences, tending the cattle, and restoring order to the ranch. Yet he knew that physical work alone could not mend the fracture within his heart. Redemption required more, it demanded courage. Humility and consistency. Martha emerged from the barn, brushing her hands on her dress, and smiled softly. "The north corral still needs mending," she said. "If we hurry, we can finish before sunset." Samuel nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude toward her. Every glance, every gesture of her patience reminded him of the cost of pride and of the warrior's lesson that honor is earned through deeds, not words. He led the way, hammer and nails in hand, as they worked in unison, the rhythmic thump of wood against timber blending with the distant calls of cattle and the whispering prairie wind. As they paused to rest, a dust cloud rose in the distance, and Samuel's pulse quickened. The horizon revealed the unmistakable forms of two shirtless, muscular Native American warriors, their long black hair streaming behind them, bodies adorned with turquoise, bone, and silver tribal jewelry glinting. In the late sun, they rode with silent authority, exuding the presence of men who belonged to the land itself. The warriors dismounted at the corral's edge, their eyes steady, piercing. Samuel felt a mixture of fear, awe, and anticipation. These men had come to test him, to observe if the lessons they had imparted had taken root. "You have labored well," the first warrior said, voice low and commanding. "Not all men recognize their failings, and fewer still take the steps to correct them. You have begun to honor the land and those who dwell upon it. That is no small feat." Samuel swallowed hard, voice rough with emotion. I am trying. Every day I try to do better, to respect what I once ignored." The second warrior nodded slowly, then gestured toward Martha, who stood beside Samuel. "Protection, care, and respect extend not only to the land but to those who trust in you. You have honored her presence here." Samuel felt a lump in his throat, realizing how profoundly these words pierced him. Martha's quiet strength, her forgiveness, and her patience had been mirrors reflecting the man he ought to be. The warrior's honor was not given lightly. It was recognition of his transformation, of his willingness to confront pride and embrace humility. The first warrior took a step closer, eyes meeting Samuel's. "We honor you, Samuel Crane, not because of wealth or cattle, but because you have chosen to act with integrity. Remember this: a man's measure is not in what he takes, but in what he protects and cherishes." Samuel's chest tightened as he absorbed their words. For years, he had measured himself in land, cattle, and the fear or respect of others. Now he understood the true metric: courage, honor, and selflessness. The warriors mounted again, dust rising around their horses' hooves, glinting in the golden sunset. They turned, one last nod acknowledging Samuel's transformation. Their presence seemed to merge with the land itself, leaving behind a silent resonance of respect and challenge. Samuel sank to the ground beside the corral, watching as the warriors disappeared into the distance. Martha came to his side, placing her hand on his shoulder. "They've seen the man you can be," she said softly. "Now you must live it." He nodded, the weight of the day pressing into him not as punishment, but as a guide. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond them, a living testament to the choices men make and the legacy they leave. Samuel realized that the ranch was no longer merely property or wealth, it was responsibility, a living classroom and a measure of his own honor. As dusk turned to twilight, the wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of sage, hay, and earth. Samuel stood, brushing dust from his coat, eyes fixed on the horizon where the warriors had vanished. He understood finally that redemption is earned, honor is recognized, and courage is measured not in conquest, but in care. And with Martha beside him, guiding and forgiving, Samuel Crane felt the first true light of a life reclaimed, a life marked not by power, but by the measure of a man's heart. The prairie wind whispered through the fields as Samuel Crane worked side by side with Martha, their hands roughened from the day's labor. The ranch, once a kingdom of pride and power, now felt alive, breathing with purpose and responsibility. Each fence post set, each barn beam secured, was a testament not only to their labor, but to the lesson Samuel had learned: humility, care, and the quiet strength of redemption. By late afternoon, the horizon shimmered with the faint glow of dust clouds. Samuel's heart quickened. He had sensed it before, the presence of those who had come to teach him, the warriors whose honor and authority transcended mortal measure. Today they returned not as a threat, but as witnesses, their arrival a final acknowledgment of his transformation. Two shirtless, muscular Native American warriors appeared atop their horses, long black hair flowing in the wind, turquoise, bone and silver tribal jewelry glinting in the sunlight. They rode silently across the valley, every movement deliberate, powerful, and commanding. Their eyes met Samuel's, steady and unwavering, weighing the man before them. Samuel straightened, feeling the weight of their gaze. This was no longer fear or awe, it was the recognition of honor earned. The first warrior dismounted, boots stirring dust as he approached. The second followed, his posture equally poised, the late sun casting a golden halo around his bronzed skin. "You have labored well, Samuel Crane," the first warrior said, voice calm yet carrying across the corral like rolling thunder. "Your deeds have reflected the lessons you were shown. You have protected, cared, and honored. That is the measure of a man." Samuel bowed his head, humility filling his chest as he realized the full weight of their words. Wealth, power, and pride had once defined him. Now, the land he had once ruled over with an iron fist seemed to accept him not for what he had taken, but for what he had given: care, protection, and respect. Martha stepped beside him, her hand brushing against his arm. Her eyes, warm and steady, met his. "You've changed," she said softly. "The ranch feels different now, and so do you." Samuel nodded. "I've learned what truly matters," he admitted. "Not the land, not the wealth, but the people and the life I am entrusted to protect. I can only hope to live up to the honor they've shown me." The first warrior raised his hand in a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent nod that conveyed judgment and respect all at once. The second warrior mirrored the motion. Samuel felt it resonate through him, deep and steady, a confirmation that he had taken the steps required to reconcile his past mistakes. Without a word, the warriors mounted again, their horses' hooves raising clouds of dust that shimmered in the golden sunset. They paused at the edge of the prairie, glancing back one final time, before vanishing into the horizon, leaving Samuel and Martha alone with the land and its vast, silent testament. Silence that followed was profound. Samuel breathed deeply, feeling the wind sweep across the fields, carrying with it the faint scent of sage, hay, and the wild prairie. He turned to Martha, eyes glistening. "We've been given a second chance," he said, voice steady. "A chance to do right every day in every choice." Martha smiled, placing her hand in his. "Then let's not waste it," she replied as dusk descended, painting the sky in purples and deep blues. The ranch seemed to glow in quiet affirmation. The fences they had mended, the barns they had repaired, the cattle grazing in calm pastures, all stood as living proof that redemption was earned, that honor was recognized, and that courage was measured by actions, not intentions. Samuel Crane, once defined by pride and wealth, now understood that true power lay in protecting, cherishing and respecting what mattered most. With Martha by his side, the ranch alive and thriving, and the memory of the warrior's honor etched into his soul, he finally felt whole. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the horizon, a land of challenge and promise. And Samuel Crane, humble, steadfast, and aware of the legacy he must uphold, knew that he had been measured and that he had passed the test. The wind carried the faint echo of hooves long gone, and in that whisper Samuel understood that honor, once earned, is a light that never fades.